Greetings all. We have several in attendance today. My name is Jason Smith, and I am currently serving as the Worshipful Master of the Oklahoma Lodge of Research. The Oklahoma Lodge of Research, chartered in 1967, was organized to promote, encourage, preserve, and foster research and study for the purpose of spreading Masonic light and knowledge. In normal years, we would have stated meetings on a quarterly basis, deal with business and take up the routine stuff, and then reward ourselves by listening to presentations on Masonic topics. But as we all know, this is not a normal year. So as we endeavor to press on in the pursuit of spreading Masonic light and knowledge in the age of COVID-19, I want to thank you for joining us today for the first in our 2020-2021 virtual education series. I especially want to thank our guest speaker, Dr. David Harrison, for joining us from across the virtual pond, all the way from Liverpool. His topic will be that of the title of one of his books, which I highly recommend, The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry, published in 2017 by McCoy Publishing and Masonic Supply Company. I will now turn it over to Brother James Durbin to give a proper introduction to Dr. Harrison.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Durbin, Senior Warden of Broken Arrow Lodge number 243 and a member of the Oklahoma Lodge of Research. Brethren, today it is my honor to introduce Dr. David Harrison, whom I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last several years. He is a past master of Lodge of Lights number 148 in Warrington, England, and he's also a fellow of the Philalethes Society. Brother Harrison is a UK-based Masonic historian who has so far authored 12 books and contributed many academic papers and articles on the subject to various journals and magazines around the world, such as Herodom, Freemasonry Today, the Philalethes Journal, and many, many others. Brother Harrison is recognized by many of his peers as the leading authority on the history of English Freemasonry. He successfully defended his PhD dissertation at the University of Liverpool in 2008, which was published the following year under the title The Genesis of Freemasonry, his first published work. His latest works include The Transformation of Freemasonry, Rediscovered Rituals of English Freemasonry, and The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry, which, as Jason said, is the subject of today's presentation. Brother Harrison went on to publish a compendium of his best articles over the last 20 years titled A Journey Through Freemasonry in 2019, and he continues to devote his life to providing us with some of the highest caliber Masonic writings of our time. Brethren, please join me in welcoming Brother David Harrison.
Thank you very much for that, James. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'll have to be good now after that fantastic intro. Right, I'll share this PowerPoint. Just bear with me a second. Okay, I think you can all see that. Is that okay? Right, I'd just like to give just an introduction to the paper first, if that's okay. Short introduction. It's a paper that was culled from my book, The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry, that was published about 3 years ago, and became a paper that I presented probably to about 100 lodges now, as I promoted the book, and it actually got published in its own right as a paper with the transactions of the Leicester Lodge of Research in England. And it's available as well for free download if anybody's interested at my academia profile website. Just type my name in Google and academia and you'll find it. It'll be on there. And also the book, anybody that's interested in a copy of the book, signed copy of the book, just let me know afterwards and we can sort that out. So now I'll take you on the journey of the lost rites, or at least some of the lost rites. So in my book, The Genesis of Freemasonry, I put forward how Dr. Jean Theophilus Desaguliers was responsible for creating the third degree sometime in the 1720s. Before this, there were two parts being performed: the entered apprentice and the fellowcraft. The new 3-degree style ritual soon spread, and it seemed that Freemasons soon wanted to explore deeper pathways within Freemasonry, leading to new ideas being developed. Chevalier Ramsay was a Jacobite Mason who had gone to France to tutor the sons of aristocrats, and in his Masonic address in 1737, he famously outlined that Freemasonry was linked to the Crusaders and chivalric orders. His oration put forward that after being preserved in the British Isles, it was transported to France, and though there is no evidence that Masonry was ever associated in any way to the Crusaders or to chivalry, it does show that at the time there was developing interest in chivalric orders in relation to Freemasonry. Though Ramsay did not set out any plans for new chivalric Masonic orders in his oration, his address certainly assisted to inspire them. The craft rituals of the time were far from standardized, and this created liberty to explore new stories, to create sequels to the Hiramic legend and the building of the temple. All this was happening during the time when English Freemasonry became split and was arguing over how the Royal Arch should fit into the system. On the continent, however, there is indeed a rich and fascinating tapestry in regards to the development of Masonic rites, some of which can be linked together during this heady manic period for access to high degrees in the 18th and early 19th centuries. As Masonic historian Lionel Simungal once wrote, the surviving degrees and orders are the distilled essence of the past. The lifeblood of some of these degrees that we practice today having their origins in these lost degrees. With the egos of the men behind them and dangerous blend of politics, magic and power, Freemasonry was taken into a very experimental place, a place that we will now explore. So the first rite I would like to introduce you to is the rite of strict observance. There was a strong desire to extend the themes explored in the craft rituals, and there were plenty of charismatic characters that were eager to create or promote new orders and grades based on the continuation of the themes for the search for lost knowledge. One such charismatic individual was Baron Karl Gotthilf von Hunt, who in around 1754 founded the rite of strict observance in Germany. Excuse me. Baron von Hunt had put forward that he had been initiated into a mysterious Masonic order of the Temple in Paris in 1742, and that his secret knowledge had been gained from unknown superiors. The rite of strict observance became a rather popular rite, spreading to many other European countries such as Switzerland, Holland, Denmark, and Russia, and included a tantalizing 7 degrees, offering the philosophy of progression to willing Freemasons. These 7 degrees, according to the transcription of the Schroeder rituals by Alan Bernheim and Arturo de Hoyos, included the first craft degrees of apprentice, fellow, and master mason, followed by Scots master, secular novice, knight, and finally lay brother. The 3 craft rituals are recognizable to any mason, but nonetheless have stark differences, such as in the master mason degree, which features a cassia branch instead of the acacia sprig that we know of today. A collection of catechisms are presented that seem quite unusual in certain contexts, and it appears that the rituals evolved down a very different pathway, though still retained the essence of the first 3 degrees. The rite was Templar orientated, its chivalric content and the mystery that surrounded its origin still tantalizing Masonic historians today. The translations of Bernheim and de Hoyos, in discussing the extracts from the history of the order, present a story of how a number of Templars fled persecution in France in 1311 and arrived in Scotland, clothed as Masons. According to the story, once in Scotland, the order continued with the usages of Masonry, chosen to preserve the memory, and that nobody was admitted as Scots master other than a child of the order. The rite in celebrating Scotland and its secret Templar heritage seems to echo the chivalric ideas presented in the oration of Chevalier Ramsay, something that was also mirrored in the rite suggestion of a mysterious Jacobite source. Indeed, Baron von Hunt's undoing was the mysterious origins of the rite, and being unable to present any tangible proof of his unknown superiors, a result of which the story became untenable and his reputation damaged. He died in 1776 in much reduced circumstances, and at the convent of Wilhelmsbad in 1782, von Hunt's rite quickly unravelled as a collection of delegates renounced the unproven Templar origins. They discarded the myth, and a complete reworking of the ritual took place, ending the practice of von Hunt's rite of strict observance. Some Masonic writers, such as Arthur Edward Waite, have made reference of the supposed Jacobite origins of von Hunt's rite. And in Paris, von Hunt believed he came into contact with a certain Knight of the Red Feather, whose identity was never revealed, but von Hunt believed was none other than the young pretender himself, Charles Edward Stuart. Arthur Edward Waite was of the opinion that von Hunt was mistaken or deceived. But either way, the Baron maintained his story until his death, and the rite of strict observance was, for a short while, one of the most progressive rites in Europe during the 18th century. Despite the end of the practice of von Hunt's rite of strict observance, its restructuring by Jean-Baptiste Willemoes led to the birth of the rectified Scottish rite, which will be discussed in a bit more detail later. The rite of strict observance also became an influence on the rite of the Philolethis and also the Swedish rite, which some of you might have heard of and might be familiar with. And that's a picture there of Baron von Hunt in all his glory. Right, the next lost rite is the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross. The Order of the Golden Rosy Cross, which was founded in Germany in the 1750s, was perhaps one of the most mysterious, esoteric Masonic orders that came into being. The principal founder of the order was the alchemist Hermann Fichtold, and indeed, alchemy was a fundamental part of the teachings of the order. Only Master Masons were considered to be members, and the order attracted a number of influential German Freemasons, such as George Foster. And that's George Foster's portrait there on the slide. Foster was a leading intellectual figure of the Enlightenment. He had accompanied his father, Johann Reinhold Foster, on Captain Cook's second voyage, whose identity was to record and write a scientific report on the voyage's discoveries, which led to the publication of the bestseller, A Voyage Around the World, on their return. George Foster went on to become a Fellow of the Royal Society and worked in a number of German universities, later embracing the French Revolution and becoming a leading light in the formation of the Mainz Republic. He died in exile in Paris in 1794. King Frederick William II of Prussia was also involved in the Order of the Rosy Cross, and the king became friends with the Freemason Voltaire and surrounded himself with artists, writers, and musicians, as well as supporting science. Frederick William was said to have been a firm believer in the healing power of an elixir known from the order. So there we have a bit of a cross between Freemasonry and magic, and indeed alchemy as well. You can see how some of these rites were being formulated. Some of these systems were being formulated and going down a rather experimental route. So next we'll come to probably the most experimental of them all, Cagliostro's Egyptian rite. So of all the Masonic rites that existed on the continent during the 18th century, Count Alessandro Cagliostro's Egyptian rite is perhaps one of the most intriguing and fascinating rites. Cagliostro himself was a man of mystery, of ego, and of creativity, the theatre of Freemasonry being the backdrop to portray the themes of alchemy and magic. something that appealed to many at the time. Cagliostro became the romantic subject of writers such as Johannes, and the romance surrounding his life seemed to blur between fantasy and reality, creating an almost mythical Masonic character. For example, Cagliostro allegedly met illustrious 18th century personalities such as the Compson, Germain, and Casanova, and Cagliostro's past was as mysterious as these two figures, the magician being identified as Giuseppe Balsamo, an Italian forger and trickster. While in France in the 1780s, Cagliostro was implicated in the affair of the diamond necklace, which involved Marie Antoinette. And after spending time in the Bastille, he was released and left for England, later leaving for Rome, where he was arrested for being a Freemason in 1789. After trying to escape from the Castel Sant'Angelo, Cagliostro was moved to the fortress of San Leo, where he died soon after. Cagliostro became such an important figure in Freemasonry at the time that he was invited to the Convention of Paris in 1784 to explain his system, a convention that the Rite of the Philolethis had been instrumental in organising. His claims included that he could renew youth, he could conjure the apparitions of the dead, he could bestow beauty on those who submitted to his system of emetic medicine, and that he could make gold. In short, his rite would reveal the true hidden mysteries of nature and science. And as it became open to women, he began to attract a number of high-ranking ladies. So that's Count Cagliostro's rite. Some of you might have heard of him, very popular. Many history books have been published over the past 10 years concerning Cagliostro's experimental pursuits in Freemasonry. So a very highly interesting figure. So next, I'd like to introduce you to the Swedenborg Rite, or the Swedenborgian Rite. Emanuel Swedenborg has never been proven to be a Freemason. He was, however, a mystic, theologian, philosopher, scientist, and inventor, whose teachings and work inspired the Swedenborg Rite. Emanuel Swedenborg was born in Stockholm in 1688, his father being professor of theology at Uppsala University and later Bishop of Skara. Swedenborg was a learned man, inventing flying machines, researching anatomy, and undertaking many different studies into various aspects of learning, being a propagator in the search for the hidden mysteries of nature and science. It was later in life that Swedenborg had a spiritual awakening of sorts, which witnessed a transition from a man of science to a mystic, a man who could talk to angels, spirits, and demons, and who had discussed the second coming of Christ and the Last Judgment. Swedenborg died in London in 1772, and he went on to inspire eminent artists and writers such as William Blake and Thomas de Quincey, as well as fellow men of mysticism such as Louis Claude de Saint Martin, who we'll find out a bit more a little later. It was after his death that the Swedenborg Rite was developed by a Polish count and Swedenborg enthusiast called Thaddeus Leszczynski Grabianka and Dom Antoine Joseph Panetti, fusing Swedenborg's mystical teachings with certain Masonic ideas. Dom Antoine Joseph Panetti had left the Benedictine order and after settling in Avignon, pursued his interest in alchemy. He then relocated to Berlin, becoming librarian to the Freemason Frederick the Great, which is disputed if he was a Freemason or not, but it's always there really. And while there, he translated Swedenborg's works into French. It was in Berlin that Panetti met the Polish Count Thaddeus Leszczynski Grabianka. And after Panetti returned to Avignon, Grabianka joined him and they both founded the Société des Illuminés d'Avignon in 1786. The Swedenborg Rite was relatively short-lived, coming to an end in the wake of the chaos brought by the French Revolution. They did, however, attract two English Swedenborgians of note, William Bryan and John Wright, who in 1789 were initiated into the mysteries of their order and were introduced to the actual and personal presence of the Lord, who was conveyed by a majestic young man in purple garments, seated on a throne, situated in an inner chamber decorated with heavenly emblems. This hints that the rite reflected the millennialism philosophies of Swedenborg, but that the rest of the ritual was like, we can only speculate. Another Swedenborg rite surfaced with the occult revival in the later 19th century, again containing elements of Swedenborg's mystical millennialism. And this later Swedenborgian rite was mainly conducted by John Yarker, who some of you might be, sorry about that, my daughter's banging on the door, who was mainly one of the occultists of the later 19th century. Right. So I'd like to introduce you to the Rite de Ellis Coens. I'll just skip this one for a while. And there we go, Martinez de Pasquale. Now, Pasquale established the Rite de Ellis Coens, or the Rite of the Elect Priesthood of Toulouse in 1760. The rite had 9 degrees divided into 3 divisions, and these included the porch, which were basically the 3 craft degrees, the temple, which were the chivalric degrees, and the shrine, which was more magical. Pasquale merged esoteric doctrines based on Gnosticism and the Kabbalah. And in short, his version of Freemasonry blended with magic to form a unique type of rite. And in this sense, the teachings of the Rite de Ellis Coens enabled its members to learn an aspect of magic that aimed to place the adept in communion with supernatural beings. Pasquale was particularly influential on Jean-Baptiste Willemoes and Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, both taking his teachings in different directions. And when Pasquale died in 1774, elements of the rite was absorbed into the restructured Rite of Strict Observance by Willemoes, who created the rectified Scottish Rite, which is still going today. And his teachings went on to influence Martinism. John Dee and Edward Kelly's system of communicating with angels in the 1500s was certainly similar to the work that was being conducted almost 2 centuries later by a certain member of the Ellis Coens, and was certainly reminiscent of Swedenborg's mystical beliefs, the search for lost knowledge being a dominating theme of these lost rites. It's also very similar as well to what Cagliostro was doing, because Cagliostro was very much into his spiritualism and used young boys really to kind of relate messages to spirits, which was very, very bizarre. Something that the early Swedenborgian rite obviously did as well, from the last extract we did on that particular one. So you can see here that there's definitely an experimental venture into alchemy, magic, and various different ideas based on these charismatic individuals. Jean-Baptiste Willemoes received training as a member of the Ellis Coens by Pasquale himself. Training that took place outside the lodge and was not part of any lodge room working, but was to be practiced alone and in private. And I'll just jump back now to Jean-Baptiste Willemoes, and he's now more famous, obviously, for conducting the rectified rite. So, despite this, the training was an essential part of Pasquale's teachings, and between 1768 and 1772, Willemoes received instruction from Pasquale in occult or magical procedure. These included not eating meat, conducting the ritual 3 days at the beginning of either equinox, and the ritual to be performed at midnight, and to wear particular clothing, while being divested of metals, which obviously reminds us of going into the initiation ceremony of first degree Freemasonry. A circle of retreat was to be drawn in the west side of the room with the proper inscriptions at the proper points. with the symbols and wax tapers, with a segment of a circle drawn on the east side of the room. After lighting all the tapers, the name of God was supplicated and the names of the inscribed angels were recited, being asked to grant that which was desired. However, in spite of this dedication, Wilhelmus only reported seeing colour and got goosebumps, ultimately becoming dissatisfied with the results. His close friend and colleague, Saint Martin, who gave himself the moniker of unknown philosopher, believed that there could be a direct communication between man and God. And he also believed that as human beings, we were all Christ's, or we all had an essence of Christ within us. Around 1770, Pasquale gave Wilhelmus further instructions, the first set of instructions obviously having failed. So he gave him a circle of retreat that was now located in the centre of the room. But by 1772, Pasquale left for San Domingo, never to return. As Waite enigmatically puts forward, I do not doubt that Wilhelmus and his circle received psychic communications. Wilhelmus and Saint Martin's exploration for the search for lost knowledge, pushing the boundaries of this world and of the next. As Arthur Edward Waite reminds us, the ceremonial magic of the elect priesthood is by no means fully available. And there were certain invocations and descriptions that were not written down. So the little that we do know only gives us but a glimpse of Pasquale's actual occult workings. We do know, however, that part of their doctrine featured a belief system of the fall of man and the restoration of man as a divine agent, being able to commune directly with God. So, just to conclude, there's a selection of the so-called lost rites there. And obviously, I use the word lost quite loosely in a way, but with the lack of continuity that occurs within these rites, we have to bear that in mind as well. But most recently, some of these have popped up again, which is very interesting. But going back to the 18th century, the later 18th century, you can see how a lot of these rites was mixed up with experimentation, with magic, with alchemy, spiritualism. Some of these dubious characters, the more dubious characters, like Count Cagliostro, for example, it's open to debate whether he was just trying to get a bit of money and a bit of power on the side. Others, like Pasquale in Ella Cohen, were very, very serious, and obviously they were probably searching in a different context for the hidden mysteries of nature and science. So many thanks for listening, and I will now turn it back over to the Worshipful Master for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Brother Harrison. I would encourage all of you, we do have a couple of questions lined up, but if you see the Q&A button on your screen, if you will go to that, and you can ask a question, type it in right there, and Dr. Harrison will answer it for you. Our first question, Dr. Harrison, is from Worshipful Brother T.S. Akers.
Right, I've just got a question there. I had read where the Rite of Strict Observance, being popular on the continent, introduced Templar to British Masonry during the 7 Years' War. Is this correct? And where the Templar orders today, or is this where the Templar orders today came from? Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question. And it's kind of true, but it's a lot more complicated than that. the rite of strict observance was a very, very influential rite. Excuse me. And it was a rite of 7 degrees. And I'm just researching for a book now at the moment about a rite that was actually called the Rite of 7 Degrees, which was influenced by the Rite of Strict Observance. It's actually part family tree of rites, if you like. So it was brought over to London by a Frenchman. And we have the chapter of Clermont. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that, which was a very early rite as well, a Templar-based rite. So round about that time, that period, the 1740s, the later 1740s, especially 1750s, you do have this Templar projection going on, really, that spread quite quickly. And those of you that are familiar with the Templar degree or the Templar grade through the York Rite, perhaps, or if there's anybody from England that's listening and they're a member of the the Knights Templar, you'll see how Christian it is and how very much central it is. Really, it tends to answer a lot of questions and puts Freemasonry on a different level. And this is what these degrees do. They kind of take it a step further. So yeah, in a way, it is right. The Rite of Strict Observance was very highly influential, especially with the Templar theme. And the Rite of 7 Degrees certainly did assist when that was planted into England in the 1760s. That certainly did inspire the growth, shall we say, of Templarism in England, and of course the Kadosh degree and the Rose Croix and all those degrees that were kind of tied together in a Christian format and a Templar format certainly did influence the state of play, really, especially in England. Saying that, however, there is evidence that in the 1770s, the York Grand Lodge was practicing Knights Templar as a 5th degree. So that was an early example, really, of progressive structure in England. It was a 5-degree structure that the York Grand Lodge was having. Right. There's another question there. So are the lost rites woven into the degrees of the Scottish Rite now? Some of them are, yeah. They've obviously changed a bit. And remember that there was only 25 degrees originally when that was transplanted into the US, and 33 degrees was created from that. Art de Hoyos is the speciality on that, really. He's a fantastic mind on Scottish Rite history. But yeah, a lot of those degrees filtered into the Scottish Rite, definitely, yeah. So there's another question there. Is this correct that all lost rites were involved more or less with magic? If this being true, it leads us to conclude that current modern is purified from superstitions. Not all the lost rites were based in magic. Obviously, the Rite of Strict Degree, the Rite of Strict Observance, and the Rite of 7 Degrees, for example, were Templar orientated. Some, however, like the Golden Rosy Cross, which you mentioned, and Cagliostro's Egyptian Rite, and obviously the Eloquem, they certainly were more open, shall we say, to magic and all magical elements such as spiritualism and alchemy, which is very interesting, because you see some rites going that way along the magical path, and others are going firmly Templar, and based in more stricter degrees, Masonic degrees, rather than the experimentation.
Thank you, Dr. Erickson. We have another question that came in on the chat. Do you think Pasquale was simply reaching into the heart of Masonry to expose its esoteric and theurgic nature to those who seek something more? Or do you believe his system was far removed from the Masonic system?
Oh no, I believe it was definitely related to Freemasonry. Just a little side story that's part of answering that question. I went to Belgium to give a talk to the regular Grand Lodge of Belgium about 3 years ago, maybe a bit longer now. Had a great time there, and I got talking to a guy there that was actually a member, or had been a member of the modern Ella Cohen, which was an Amberline kind of variant. Amberline was for those of you that some might be familiar with Amberline, but he was French, early 20th century, and he developed a lot of these old rites. But he gave me a load of ritual. He just passed it over, this old stuff, which is great, fascinating stuff. And he said to me, and I've quoted him many times after this, but he said Freemasonry, for most people, esoteric people that are on that pathway, see Freemasonry as a gateway. And once that gateway is open, you venture that way or that way, and you can find the hidden mysteries and the lost knowledge by any means you can, So what I believe Pasquale was doing, he was using a Masonic structure and using it as a gateway to explore further avenues to gain lost knowledge, the hidden mysteries of nature and science, And this is what I meant by these experimental pathways, these certain experimental ventures. And it seems that on the continent they were more open to do this. I mean, today, if it happened today, we'd certainly, there'd be words like clandestine thrown about, and things of this nature, But back in those days, it was more. There was more freedom, to experiment and getting involved in a more magical pathway, with alchemy and spiritualism and other kind of magical knowledge or magical training, was part of that journey of trying to find the lost knowledge,
I have a question. Do you think that the system we have now of recognition and regular lodges, grand lodges, clandestine, those types of things, do you think that has restricted or hampered different forms of Masonry and the different things that happen in Masonry now compared to back then in the pursuit of knowledge?
Yeah, well, that's a very, very, very difficult question to answer, really. It's even back then, you see, there was in England, for example, you had the ancients, you had the moderns, and you had the York Grand Lodge, or the Grand Lodge of All England held at York, if you want to give it its long title. And each one of those Grand Lodges thought that they were the Grand Lodge. that they were the official one. The ancients were quite lucky because they were quickly recognised when they formed in 1751, I think, by the Scottish and Irish Grand Lodges. So they had recognition, and the moderns, or the Premier Grand Lodge, certainly had this recognition, being founded in 1717. The York Grand Lodge believed that they were the original Grand Lodge. So each one of those had this kind of certainty and this claim, even though there was a lot of bickering going on towards the end. So even back then, recognition was involved, and and indeed on the continent, this is why we have the convents of Wilhelmsbad and in Paris, where some of these rites came together, and they basically heard from various different figures about their, the different rites. Like with Cagliostro, he went to the Paris convent and basically he tried to explain his system. So in the hope that it would get some kind of recognition, which he never really got, because with Count Cagliostro, he was a very suspect, shady figure. And indeed, with Cagliostro as well, he came over to London in 1786, and he was invited to the Lodge of Antiquity. So he was hoping that he was going to explain his system, and this Egyptian rite of his would be accepted. But he was ridiculed in the lodge and basically sent packing. So even then, there was this aspect of regularity, recognition. So it's always been there, and indeed, I think Freemasonry needs that, because otherwise it'd go in many different directions, without any without any containment. It would just explode in many different directions. You'd have people going off doing the Illuminati, and someone else going off doing Memphis Mizraim and exploring whatever, and all these weird Templar organizations, and that you find in various places. And another side to it as well is looking at taking Memphis Mizraim as an example. There's many different variations of that. You have Frank Ripple's version in Italy, which I think is 100 degrees. You have one in France, there's one that's only 96 degrees, one that's 97, one that's 98, so it's a very weird eclectic mix. So it's a very difficult, once you open that can, it's like a can of worms, but the good thing is you have the Grand College of Rites, which obviously translates a lot of rituals and publishes them, so you can actually have access to these rituals and discover what they are, and if you want to read them or experiment with them, you can do it in your bedroom, I suppose. You can read the ritual in your bedroom and take it easy, but they're still there to study, which is good.
Brother David, we have another question in from the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the rectified rite was an adaptation of Pasquale's philosophy without the concentration on magical elements?
It was a bit of a blend, really. It was mainly the Rite of Strict Observance that was restructured. Templar base of it. And what Willermoz brought to it as well was that kind of flexibility, I think. So he came from this Eloquem background as well. Obviously something that he might have failed at in a way, well, not failed, but he was maybe disappointed. As he explained in the paper, he didn't really see much. He got goosebumps and saw flashes and things like that when he tried the magical teachings of Pasquale. But he did take something there, which was that flexibility, really, I think. And he obviously learned how to structure a rite as well, and to make a rite work, because a rite basically is a group of Masonic degrees that have a progression and a system. And he obviously injected his experience into that, which was fascinating, really. And again, it survived. The rectified rite survived. So it's a very, very interesting aspect. So probably a bit of both. He definitely brought something with him and injected that into his the creative aspect, shall we say.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Do we have any data on participation numbers of the Lost Rites, of the social impact? How many brothers were involved in these?
It's a very interesting question, because say, for example, the Rite of Strict Observance, which was very, very popular, that spread Germany and Central Europe and into France as well. Also spread into Eastern Europe, Hungary, and Croatia, believe it or not. And it was renamed in Croatia to the Drakovic Observance. And that, for example, existed for around about a couple of decades in Croatia. And there was a number of lodges tied in with that. About 5, 6, 7 lodges that were tied in with that in Croatia, I believe. So there was quite a few Freemasons that were dabbling in this, and also there was Freemasons that were cross-pollinating, shall we say. So some were members of the Strict Observance, some left that and joined Cagliostro, for example. Like there's I think it was Bob Cooper that wrote a book on Cagliostro a few years ago, and he mentions that Cagliostro had been in the Rite of Strict Observance first. So he'd been influenced by that and then formed his own rite. Pasquale, I think, just working off memory now, I think he was involved in the Rite of Strict Observance. So there's a lot of cross-pollination and people leaving and forming their own rites, and obviously drawing from their Masonic past and bringing people with them, bringing Freemasons with them. So it's part of a wider family tree, really. You can actually see some of these lost rites as a family tree, that's basically kind of grows up and branches off, and then you get the Rite of 7 Degrees, of course, Pierre Lambert de Lintot, and as I mentioned, he brought that over into England, and that effectively is related to the chapter of Claremont, and so there's a lot of crossing over and mutation, shall we say, Masonic mutation. So, but yeah, there was quite a lot of these people, a lot of Freemasons involved, spread across many countries. The Melosino rite is another one, which is a 7 degree rite, very close to the right of strict observance. And that was going into Russia. So spread over a wide geographical area.
Okay, we have one more question that I'm glad this came in at the end. This is a very exciting and possibly controversial question, so that's always a good one to have at the end. The question is, regular Grand Lodges affirm that Freemasonry is immutable and unchanging, though it's clear that early documented Freemasonry evolved, with the third degree being a major innovation. Do you feel that the current immutable system is valuable in preserving tradition, or is it suppressing necessary evolution and development?
Yeah, it's a very, very, very good question. A bit similar to James's question, I think, but reworded differently. Yeah, again, that's going back to the regularity, the great regularity question, and when you look at Freemasonry in the 18th century, very, very experimental. Even the development of the third degree, which we know happened in the 1720s. We know there was only 2 degrees before that. We have the manuscript from 1696, the Edinburgh House manuscript, which shows only two degrees effectively, or 2 parts, the entered apprentice and the fellowcraft. So we know the master's part, the third degree basically appeared, which was effectively like an experiment, really. This is what it's all about. It's taking the story further, and indeed in my book, The Lost Rites, I do start off by saying that Freemasons always want more. We always want more. We do the third degrees, and it's like, well, what comes next? And we sometimes get told, that, oh yeah, well, there's only 3 degrees in Freemasonry. So that's it. And then there's all these other beautiful orders, Mark Mason's degree, which really fits in between the fellowcraft and the master degree. So that's like like one of those prequels, that kind of gets inserted somewhere else. And then you get the Templar degree and Rose Croix and many others. So you can see how these rites developed, and they wanted to contain them. They wanted to kind of piece them together and put them in a progression, a package, basically. What these guys that created these rites wanted to do was create a sellable package of 7 or maybe 9 degrees. And this is where you get these charismatic figures like Baron von Hunt and Pasquale and Cagliostro, many others that package these rites and sell that. So coming back to the original question, today, are we kind of enclosed? Are we kept in a box by it? Well, on one hand, we can do our 3 degrees in a lodge that's recognised and that's legal, so to speak. And on another hand, we have the flexibility to do these other degrees, be it with the Scottish Rite or the York Rite, or if you're in in England, the UK, you can join individual side orders and take it that way. But yeah, the 18th century was this period of experimentation. There was more freedom, certainly on the continent, to do this, and there was more flexibility. This was the age of enlightenment, and this was the age of new thinking, a new way of thinking, which to modern people, it's quite difficult to get into the mindset of an 18th century person, who was suddenly taught about all these new dimensions and new ways of thinking, and which was the Enlightenment, you know, this brand new way of seeing things. And hence you get the revolutions and things like that, which again is like political experimentation. So this kind of experimentation was going on in every philosophical thought, really. You know, not just Freemasonry, but you got political, you got scientific, and all manner of things in literature, in theatre, in art. You know, so it was definitely a different time, and experimentation was part of the order, really. You know, today, you know, it's, I suppose, you know, on one hand, it's good to be secure and to be in a recognised lodge, and to have these additional degrees if you want them, you know. And then on the other hand, we've got all this beautiful history, you know, where we can research and find out what these other degrees, you know, were like, what these other rites were like. Hence now, some are making a comeback. You know, the rite of strict observance, for example, has popped back up in France, and the Bavarian Illuminati has popped back up. There's, you know, that's going on in certain places, and you know, so you know, they're popping back, you know, and people are getting more aware of them now because books are being published with these rituals in, you know, so they can read them, digest them, and maybe experiment privately, you know, that seems to be what's happening, really, you know, which is interesting. And again, I think today as well, we have a very esoteric vein running through Freemasonry, which is the first first in quite a while, really. I mean, if you look at the previous generations, you know, the post-war generation of Freemasonry, it was very ordered and to do with charity, and as John Yarker said, the knife and fork Freemasons, you know, and our generation that's come up now, you know, there's more of an interest in the spiritual side of Freemasonry, you know, which is interesting. You know, we've not had that so aggressively since the occult revival in the later 19th century, which is, you know, I'm sure someone will do a paper on that. You know, it's good.
Well, thank you, Brother David. I'd like to invite now Most Worshipful Robert G. Davis, who's the Grand Master of our jurisdiction here, and he wants to address this last question. And I think that as the author of the Mason's Words, which is a very good examination of American Masonic ritual development, he's right in tune to do that. So, Most Worshipful, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Jason, and Dr. Harrison. Thank you so much for making your presentation today. I enjoy reading your works, and I admire you greatly. And I had the honor of nominating you as a fellow of the Philadelphia Society, and we were excited that happened. And but I was really I got to thinking about the last question that was asked, and it is very true that that the Grand Lodge system of Freemasonry was always intended to be immutable and unchanging, because it was established to create an initiatic order for men that was founded on the history of the guilds, and it was focused on the old charges, and it brought us the landmarks of Freemasonry. So the very traditions of the order are were established with the development of the Grand Lodge. But the Grand Lodges chose from the very beginning that their system of instruction, would not exceed the 3 degrees. I mean, with some variations concerning the Royal Arch. But when the 3rd degree entered the system, it was the first innovation in Freemasonry, and it was also the first of the higher degrees in Freemasonry. And it established an allegory that left so much for interpretation that it in fact inspired the creation of all the degrees that succeeded it. I don't think we could argue that Grand Lodges ever suppressed the development of further knowledge in Masonry simply because they never prohibited, the creation of added systems of degrees through the Scottish Rite and the 25 degree system of Moran and all of these other rites that developed. What's interesting, I think, is that the first 3 degrees of Masonry were all allegorical, and when the lectures were developed in the second half of the 18th century, it became more than just an initiatic order. It was also an initiatic order that had a philosophy. And all of these other rites that came on the scene after the 3rd degree was established, I think were focused on investigating the allegories themselves, the hidden interpretations of the information that was contained. And even though we call the rites that you introduced to us today the lost rites, as you well know, most of them are still being practiced. I mean, the rite of strict observance, the rectified rite, the rite of Martinism, the rite of Alcuins. And so really today, a Mason can join almost any of these rites, and elements of, well, the original rituals of those rites are still in place and being practiced, as you know, in some form. So I think that the Grand Lodges simply decided to hold true to the landmarks, that they would assume the authority over the first 3 degrees of Masonry, and they didn't particularly condemn the development of ideas and the inspiration of men to explore the nature of deity and the nature of man and the relationship between those 2 things. And so I think that all of the hidden knowledge that was developed originally in the 18th century is now available to men who want to seek, that kind of information. And I'm really pleased that the Grand Lodges have never, created rules that said that men could not explore, the hidden meanings of Freemasonry. And we have to always, we always have to maintain allegiance to that original system, because it gave us the initiation, through the entered apprentice degree to start with. And then it created the mystery through the development of the 3rd degree. And it's the mysteries that we've been contemplating from that time forward.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can agree with that completely. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because some of those other degrees, like the architects and the great the grand architect degrees that you find in the Rite of 7 degrees, for example, and other rites, they take the revenge story of Hiram, for example. Hiram. So that's just extending the story. It's like a sequel and then another sequel. And someone once said to me, it's a bit like Star Wars. You get those first 3 Star Wars films that we got in the 1970s. Then George Lucas came along 20 years later and did the prequels, and then and then some more sequels, and then there's other ones, you know.
Yeah.
And so it just goes on like that, an extension of the story, you know.
And they all relate to the hero's journey.
That's right.
You know,
that's
they
right.
Always they all have that fundamental mythic base.
Yeah,
and,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And now, of course, we've got all these rites there that have popped back up, and you know, some have been messed around a bit and are, you know, totally different from what they were. Others are quite similar, but still slightly different. And people can now, you know, go in there and check them out and look at the rituals and digest them and enjoy them, and which is great, really. You know, they're all there to be seen, and they're all there to be explored.
I think one of the great benefits of the further development of the various rites that we have is I've always perceived that the English ritualist created the intellectual base for the philosophical development of Freemasonry. And they did it. They never attempted to explain the allegories because they knew the allegories could only evolve from the heart. And so one of the things that's really interesting about a lot of these additional rites is that they became rites of the heart rather than the head. And, you know, it compelled men to understand that the inner work can only be found from seeking within yourself. And so the exploration of that incredible mystery and that allegory is enhanced a great deal by the development of all these rites that you've discussed. And it's what takes us from our head to our intuitive nature, I think. And
yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's what makes Freemasonry, you know, so appealing and a beautiful society to explore, because you've got all these different moralistic stories and that are laced with spiritual meaning and the meaning of life, really, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They're all interlaced with many different layers. You know, it's multi-layered. It's very, very much like Shakespeare in a way, or a good film. You know, a good book. You know, that's multi-layered. You know, and can keep you interested for life. You know, it's a journey, a fascinating journey. Yeah.
I can't think of any other system of thought that is focused on us working on ourselves, you know, building our own temple to God and understanding what the nature of that temple building is. And that's what makes Freemasonry so valuable and powerful, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And to be given the opportunity to understand it as well, and to get in there and get the essence, the very essence of that you know, that ethos and the meaning. You know, it's a life's journey. You know, it can alter a man for the better. You know? That's what it means. You know, to make a better man. You know, to inject that knowledge and that realization as well. You know?
So there's no question in the world that the Grand Lodges and the system that they have the authority over has preserved our traditions. And if we didn't have that, and if we didn't keep it, then we would go astray, and then truly all of this information would be lost.
That's right.
So it's very, it's just critically important that we always maintain that tradition. And then where we choose to take it in our own groups that may become ritual based or whatever, you know, it's inspired by that tradition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very true. Yeah. Well, it's good to speak to you, because it's been a while. We used to message, didn't we? Over the years we've messaged a few times, you know. But I'd like to say thank you for the for the nomination as well, which was very, very nice indeed. You know, that was
certainly my pleasure.
Yeah. And I've always been a big fan of yourself, the likes of John Cooper as well, you know, because you're our guiding lights, you know, which is great. Yeah.
Well, one of the beautiful things about our technology today is that, you know, Masonic knowledge and education is now readily available in digital forms, and as you know, a person can join one of these Zoom forums almost every night of the week if they want to. So there's no reason why a man cannot learn about Masonry and become very knowledgeable in Masonry. And this is the first time in the history of the world, you know, that we've had this opportunity where we can talk globally. And the Masonic scholarships and scholars in Europe can talk freely with the Masonic scholars in America. And, you know, we just have a worldwide connection now. So I wanted to thank the Oklahoma Lodge of Research for presenting this presentation today, and applaud them for using this technology. And while I will always enjoy sitting in a lodge room and listening to a presentation, you know, person to person, this is also a wonderful option. So thank you guys from the Oklahoma Lodge of Research for having Dr. Harrison.
Yeah, and yeah, I'd like to reiterate that. Thank you very much, for the invite, and for the opportunity, Jason and James in particular. It's been great. Yeah, it's always nice to do these, as I mentioned earlier on. You know, these Zoom things, you know, Zoom talks. The way it kind of brings people together, especially during the pandemic, really. You know.
Yeah, I know.
It's held people together, kept people together, kept people interested, and obviously people that want to research and listen to speakers and learn more about Freemasonry.
Absolutely,
it's vital.
Yeah.
So it's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you again for accepting our invitation, and I would like to put up a slide here. This is a notice of our next virtual presentation, which will be in about a month, January 2nd, and it will be 10 a.m. in the morning. And that's going to be presented by Worshipful Brother Robert H. Johnson, who is a well-known on the internet as a blogger and an essayist and a podcast master. And he's going to be presenting the Masonic Pub Crawl, Freemasonry in America and its Colonial Tavern Beginnings. And we thought that'd be a fun thing to have as we're getting past New Year's, and hope you can join us for that.
Sounds a good one, that one. Yeah, I just saw the pub crawl one there. That was yeah, excellent. Yeah, sounds good.
So thank you again, Brother David, and
thank you,
and all that have joined us, and we'll end this for today. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.